have this article very, very excited. This is almost kind of just a way to flex that I got the print edition of Current Affairs finally. 25th print edition. My first. Very excited. This is the only article I read to. I kind of did skip straight to it. But yeah. So it kind of talks about, it starts out by, here it is. It starts off with, imagine, presuming you don't already, that you live in a swing state. Is there a single issue or an approach to governments or a character deficit or a pass vote that you consider to be disqualifying to a Democratic presidential nominee? And, I think this is a really, really great point, because do we have lines? While I see, there is always a true argument, there's always hopefully, there'll always be a true argument that the Democrats will be clearly marginally better than the Republicans. But is there a point? Is there a line that they cross in their attempt to win over the vast moderate radical middle, or whatever they call it these days, that will be too far for you? Or a candidate that they nominate that will be too far for you? I mean, it's certainly possible. If your answer is no, there is no single issue or litmus test that is disqualifying. Was there once a time, before Trump perhaps, when you would have answered yes? What changed your mind? Was it the Muslim ban or Trump's record-setting volume of federal court appointments, or gassing the George Floyd protests for the sake of a White House photo op? Has defeating Trump become a goal that, trumps all else? Would you, like Nation journalist Katha Pollitt, vote for Joe Biden if he boiled babies and ate them? Would you vote for him even if he shot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue? What if he shot them in the leg? The idea that Republicans would vote for Trump, even if he committed murder on one of New York's most iconic streets, once evoked to illustrate how craven, how lacking in standards Republicans can be. But since the beginning of the Democratic primary contest, long before it was even clear who exactly would be throwing their hat in the ring, Democratic voters and candidates have been repeatedly asked the same question: will you vote blue no matter who? Will you pretty much essentially do the same thing? Will you give us our undying loyalty no matter what we do, no matter what policy we abandon, no matter what principles we compromise? Will you always vote for us because you know the consequences are worse? And again, I think the question is, once you do that, what principles do you have left? The logic is simple. Trump is so cruel and presents such an enormous threat to, nearly everyone, that he must be stopped at all costs. And again, it's a very, very, I think, sound and fair point. But, as my former interstate colleague Mehdi Hassan has argued forcefully and often, no matter what Biden's flaws are, Trump's are worse. Certainly, the threat posed by Trump would be difficult to overstate. The federal judiciary is already lost for at least a generation. His withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accords is but one example of his contempt for the environmental crisis that threatens life on Earth as we know it. And his 2020 budget stands poised to cut essential social programs that keep the most vulnerable Americans barely afloat. But although I agree Trump must be defeated, I don't think it must come at the price of abandoning the values which ostensibly motivate our opposition to him. Okay, that's such, I think, really why I love this article, and I think it's such a point that the Democrats really have to grapple with, especially progressive Democrats. You're resisting Trump supposedly because you have some fundamental disagree with him, and supposedly that's on policy. So there's some policies that you would find just not okay, beyond the pale, a deep structural problem that just couldn't be reneged on. But if this is the political tact that you want to take, then where is that line? That's what she's asking. So again, from the article here, now that Joe Biden is the nominee, vote blue no matter whoism is practically principally deployed to shield him from personal accountability and calls to move left, where the bulk of American voters are on policy. To criticize him or merely decline to endorse him is to cast a vote to support Trump, according to prominent political pundits, which is, again, literally not true if you live in 80% of the states in America that you pretty much know which way it's going to go. I don't know. What? five, like how many? There are like 9 swing states out of 50. Like most of them, you know which way you're going. You can vote however you want if you're a Sanders supporter or someone who's uncomfortable with Joe Biden from the left. Like, and it will not affect the outcome at all. It just won't. But yeah, if we accept the binary that your vote is either unconditional or pledge to Trump, it removes our ability to affirm the values which will remain important long after the election is over. I mean, yeah, what happens, again, this is the question that people need to start asking. What happens when Trump goes away? What happens when you can't hide behind that boogeyman anymore? Yeah, long before any substantive allegation of Tara Reade's claims, Me Too activists bent over backwards, quote-unquote, activists, to revise their approach to sexual assault claims from believe women to the same due process claims Republicans leveraged in defense of Kavanaugh. I believe that we should believe women, explained Me Too activist, and then again, activist put wonderfully by Breonna Joy Gray in quotes here, Alyssa Milano. That does not mean at the expense of not giving men their due process. Which again, it's a fair point. It's a fair point. Like, but we're not saying that about Brett Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford. Of course, the Republicans in that case were hell-bent on not providing due process and just rushing the confirmation along because they didn't want due process for some reason. Could speculate all as to the many reasons why that Republicans may not want a full and thorough investigation of Christine Blasey Ford's claims. But anyway, recall the cable news commentary following the June 2016-2019 debate where television personality Donnie George argued early in the primary process that substantive policy concerns were secondary to beating Trump. It's not the issues, it's not universal health care, it's not a women's reproductive rights, as important as that is, he argued, just Trump. And that may be an appropriate descriptive claim. It's not the normative one journalists should have been making. The idea that voters only cared about beating Trump led journalists to assess candidates through that lens almost exclusively. In doing so, they collapsed the important distinctions between candidates that voters might have cared about had they been made clear. And I think this is also, and again, another great point by Breonna Joy Gray. Like, there are like so much election, so much of the primary coverage on the Democratic side is, well, we know what the voters want. Can they beat Trump? Can they beat Trump? Can they beat Trump? Like, and that was really a kind of an electability concern that was so frustrating to Sanders supporters because Sanders supporters, like for example me, would be like kind of screaming from their mountaintops. Bernie like has the support. Bernie has the policy support, has the enthusiasm, has the people out knocking on doors for him. But what do you get from the media? It's almost like one of those memes where you have like the faces drawn, and of course the crying face man is like Bernie supporters being like, Bernie has enthusiasm, Bernie has policy support, Bernie has people knocking on doors for him. And then the media is just like the contempt face being like, yeah, Biden's electable. What do you want? Sorry. Like that's what it is. Media controls electability, nobody else. That's why it's such a dumb concept. Like you could make the case for anybody. Yeah, so we tear each other down so much that by the time it's time for an election, and we've seen this happen obviously with Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, by the time we got the time to vote, it's like, well, I'm a Bernie supporter, but now I can't support Hillary. Breakfast Club co-host Angela Yee said in a recent interview with Daily Show host Jon Stewart. And I think with that, with the Republicans, whoever their candidate is, it doesn't matter. They're behind them 100%. Republicans will switch what they think depending on what the leader tells them. There's no principle behind it anymore, agreed Stewart. There is no principle but power. But Gray, I think, rightly points out, I'm not sure that Yee's assessment is accurate. The 2016 Republican primary was incredibly divisive, and yet they won the general election because they had a battle-tested nominee that was ready to go for the general. Yeah, so Trump nicknamed frontrunner Ted Cruz, quote, Lying Ted, attacks his wife's looks. If you don't remember, that was a pretty funny affair, and implied his father killed JFK. In Utah, the right-leaning independent Evan McMullen won a shocking 21% of the vote, and Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson received number 3 times as many votes as Green Party candidate Jill Stein, suggesting that a much larger number of any Trump Republicans than left-wing Hillary defectors. But look closely what's happening in the Breakfast Club exchange above. Both Yi and Stewart express a sort of envy for the Republican position, which they admit is lacking in integrity. In any other context, there is no principle, but power would be read as a moral indictment. But here, it's intoned almost wistfully, as if an absence of principle is something to which Democrats should aspire, as long as it helps us win. I think the big question worth asking, I think the question that comes really most intentionally out of this article, I think that it sticks out to me, is once you win, will you still have any principles when you get there? That's the real question. If you raise the bar so you're just this high from the top of Trump, like Trump's down here, Trump's at the bottom, rock bottom, can't get any worse than Trump. But if you compromise all your positions and your big mic drop own, like Joe Biden's is that, quote, I will read my presidential daily briefings, and you won't have to worry about my Twitter when I'm president. Like, what else is there left? What is the big thing that's like, yeah, this guy is going to do something for me? Like, what is the indication? What's the theory of the case that says he's going to do something for me? There is none. Like, it's just, you don't have anything. You don't. It's nothing. It's emptiness. That's what you get with the modern Democratic Party.
Just keep listening. It's the Spencer Walsh Radio Network.
So I do also want to, get into this whole thing with Joe Biden, and Jack Crosby writing about it in the Wonderful Discourse blog. And I think it's such an important question. Like, what does the left do? What does Joe Biden do if he wins? And I think that's definitely a question worth considering. We're going to consider right now with Jack Crosby in the Discourse blog. But again, please do subscribe if you feel like going to the Discourse blog, subscribing to them. They support us, support my show. So, yeah, do consider subscribing. They're a great resource for progressive content. And Substack, there's a lot of great people on Substack as well. So Crosby writes, I earnestly and desperately hope that Joe Biden becomes president next January. I hope that he wins the election in November, which currently seems likely, and I hope that Donald Trump agrees to a Democratic transfer of power, which seems, well, I don't know. I think a lot of that stuff could be a little overblown. But lately, I've been thinking a bit more about a different question, which is, then what? It was really kind of hard to think about, like, what is the end game? Like, what happens after Trump's gone? Like, we spent so much time, like, in the Trump era, we don't really consider what is on the other side. Like, what is the next step here? The Biden campaign is built on a very simple strategy: do the bare minimum and let Trump destroy himself before November. It's a pretty effective strategy as far as Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016 with essentially the opposite strategy, which I think Taibbi was talking about this. No political caution versus all the political caution. Two really unorthodox, traditionally very ineffective campaign strategies that both look like they're going to work. So it's kind of insane. His strategy in 2016 was essentially be on the news constantly, talk about everything, scream, yell, and holler until enough people start hollering along with you, and you win, provided your opponent chugs hubris juice by the gallon, doesn't go to Michigan. Joe Biden is not Donald Trump. He has enormous name recognition and the general trust of much of the mainstream public, while carrying little to none of Hillary Clinton's weird personal and political baggage. Again, some of it motivated by her gender. I'll give the Hillary Clinton people out there that. So far, this strategy is working perfectly. Biden is dominating polls in states that were battlegrounds in 2016 and even running neck and neck with Trump in places that should be solid red. This could all collapse before November if, for some reason, the catastrophic pain that is mounting over in the country boils over and does things I personally cannot predict to the political climate. But for right now, Team Biden looks pretty good. But that brings me back to the original question. Then what? Biden's pitch is that he will be the steady leader that Donald Trump is not, but as yet, we have virtually no evidence that he's even capable of that anymore. Consider this, a substantively useless clip, one of many examples of the idiotic fluff that a president has to deal with at the hands of news anchors trying to keep their viewers interested until the next ad break. Of course, he's going to reference the "Are you a junkie?" thing. In live interviews, Biden has made almost zero progress toward coherency or respectability or even some kind of normality. Like, how much different is it going to be for Americans, like, when we turn on the TV and Trump's calling a reporter fake news and Biden comes on and is like, come on, Jack! Like, just hollering, come on, Jack! At, like, some